All right. How do we turn on the video?
It's on.
Hello.
Okay. Well, good afternoon and welcome all to the Lunch and Learn on today, April the 14th, 2023. And I'm not sure if you were with us on our last Lunch and Learn, which was right after the Texas legislative session began on January 6th. We kind of laid out the process and what upcoming topics might be and things like that. Well, now that all the bills have been filed, and it might be a good time to have a midterm legislative update. As I said, the Texas legislature has been in session since January the 10th. And so we're just kind of looking at what's happened so far. On January 6th, we did introduce that 254 counties serve the needs of 29.5 million Texans, and that the county population range in size from just under 100 people in Loving County to 4.728 million people in Harris and Dallas County, that's us, they're in second place with 2.7 million people. Quite a bit's going on. Also note that Dallas County would be the 29th largest state if we were a state. So just kind of put you a little bit of context of what we're talking about here. Public health, public safety, courts, we collect taxes, preserve records, work on roads, bridges, trails, and manage all elections. That's what we do as county government. But we have asked a couple of people to join us who are very familiar with the legislative process and what's going on with the legislature right now, because they do watch it very carefully. May not have made note that counties, in fact, are figments, so-called, of state government. Therefore, unlike cities, we must ask permission from the state if we ever want to change what we're already directed to do by statute. So we have a very different relationship there. But I would like to introduce the two people we have visiting with us. And first is Tom Smith, who is, he's known as Smitty. And Tom Smith was state director of the Texas Office of Public Citizen in Austin from 1985 through 2017. And prior to joining Public Citizen, he was a VISTA volunteer, a legal assistant, a legislative aide, director of the Houston Food Bank, and operator of an anti-hunger advocacy program. Public Citizen is a consumer and environmental group active in issues concerning energy, environment, ethics and campaign finance reform, trade agreements with Mexico, and urban sprawl. Smitty is noted as an effective public interest lobbyist, and he is currently the executive director of the Texas Electric Transportation Resources Alliance. So as you can tell, he's been active quite a while. Also on of our guests here today is another person who has been around the legislature a little bit, and his name is Charles Reed. He is an assistant county administrator, plus the legislative liaison for Dallas County. He's been a budget analyst with Dallas County since 2010. He has also worked the legislative session on behalf of Dallas County since 2015. Other responsibilities have included managing the CARES Act funds as well as the ARPA funds for Dallas County. So between the two of them, I think we bring a pretty good perspective of the process, the legislative process, as well as what are the topics, what are people talking about in the legislature this year. All bills have been filed. And so now the horse trading begins as to what gets to the committee and has a shot of coming to the floor and being voted on. So this will be a question. Let us start with Smitty, and welcome, glad you're there. What do you see as far as bills of particular interest that have been filed?
Well, there are a number of bills that are going to dramatically affect Texans and counties in particular. And one of the bills that I think is going to be most impactful for you are bills like Senate Bill 175 that would essentially say that municipal governments, county governments, et cetera, can't lobby, can't hire the lobbyists to participate in the process and to somehow protect themselves from bad policies that they understand, but that legislators may not. And that's Mays Middleton is the primary sponsor of that. And I'm sure Charles can give you an update on where that is in the process and efforts that are being made to try and stop this. But typically what happens is that these bills are going to get enormous popular support, but are going to come right down to a couple of key votes in the calendars committee and in some other venues within the process where there may be an opportunity to stop them. And that's where your lobbyists are going to become really critical, along with those of the various associations, the municipal association, the counties association, and so forth. One thing I do want to point out is this bill would say you can't pay through your dues to county associations, whether it be the Texas Association of Counties, the Texas Association of Urban Counties, as I understand it, to hire lobbyists to represent your interest. So that's a big one. And then there's also what they call a preemption bill. House Bill 2127 by Burroughs and a number of other people that would essentially say counties for the first time are preempted and have to follow state law on a wide variety of issues having to do with the environment, your ability to regulate certain financial transactions, way we treat dogs and cats. So it's a wide ranging thing. Now, I've been around a while. What is alarming to me is I've been lobbying or around the Capitol for 42 years. And as you can see, there are quite a few lines in my face because of that process. I will say this is the worst session that I have been through, and the worst session in particular for county and municipal government. Then there are other things I want to come back to about some proactive things that the county may decide to engage in that don't have to do with the state government. But let me pass it over to Charles and see what you want to pick up on.
Yeah, so one thing that I would love to add to this is the property tax relief bills that have been proposed on both sides. As everyone knows, the county's primary revenue source is the property tax. You've got competing interests or competing proposals on the House side and on the Senate side that now have both crossed into the other chamber as of yesterday, and they're starkly different from one another. On the Senate side, they're proposing increasing the homestead exemption for your school property tax bill, and on the House side, they're proposing a just straight 5% appraisal cap on real property. Both deliver property tax relief, but they do it in entirely different ways of each other, and deliver relief to one delivers relief to homeowners, the other delivers relief to everybody, essentially, every property owner in the state of Texas. Another one that I wanted to bring up is there's a lot of bills that have been filed that would prevent our public health departments from responding to epidemics or endemics or any kind of public health crisis that is facing us now and in the future. Normally, we don't see these kinds of bills, but as a result of COVID-19 and all of the politics surrounding that, we are now having to deal with bills. For example, one filed by Representative Harrison that would essentially create a cause of action for our nurses who give shots if we don't get informed consent, which we always do. But even in the case of the filed version, there was provision saying that even if we gained informed consent, we could be accused of essentially coercing them into giving informed consent, and it would open us up to lawsuit. Luckily, Representative Harrison fixed the language in that bill for us, but that is just an example of what is probably 20 or 30 bills that I can think of off the top of my head that have become that are on that front. And so I think, and then on top of that, the variety of election bills that have been filed, one that is a straight up takeover by the Secretary of State of our elections department that we've been working against for months now at this point. And then others that would increase the penalty for voter fraud to a state jail felony, punishable by up to multiple years in prison. And so just lay those out for the discussion, that it seems to be the general theme of the session fits into those five buckets.
Huh. Thank you very much. Both houses have submitted their view of the budget. And obviously now is when you really start that conversation. When I pulled them up, I was kind of surprised that the raw amounts appear to be relatively close together. The Senate is coming out with a $3.8 billion spending plan, and the House with a 302.6 billion state budget. And they seem to have some of the same, teacher salaries, tax cuts. What do you think as far as, because now the dickering really begins. What's going to happen there?
Why don't you go ahead and take the lead? I don't follow the budget.
Yeah, no problem. So, on the big ticket items, I think it's really all that's in question between the two. The property tax relief, both plans that have been presented by the House and the Senate provide a different amount of property tax relief. And under the way that the budget is constructed, any dollar that you spend refunding property tax dollars counts against the spending cap. And so it has to be calculated and then included as part of the budget that they file. So the reason why the Senate proposal is a larger spending plan than the House is largely determined by that property tax refund of sorts, property tax savings that they're delivering to the taxpayer. The rest of the budget is, within 5% of each other on the line items. So both sides they're both proposing basically the same amount of investment in detention services for adults, for juveniles, mental health services for adults and juvenile, the education funding. Both of them are pretty much in lockstep on how much they want to increase the basic allotment. They're close enough that it'll get settled pretty quickly in conference committee. But really the difference between the two budget proposals are those big ticket items, which is property tax savings. And then, and apologies, there's also a significant investment on the Senate side into mental health facilities, constructing mental health facilities that some of which is not included on the House side. But they'll go to conference committee pretty quickly, probably next week is my guess. By the end of next week, they'll go to conference committee and they'll start hammering those out.
Okay, thank you very much. One of the, fascinating things about the legislature is something that I take great interest in, and it's the personalities that are there. Because you become very aware that, yes, the issues and the bills are utmost importance, but in following it, it's the personalities that you watch. What are your thoughts on the governor and the lieutenant governor's stance on priority lists and legislation those kinds of things. Maybe you want to take this first?
Sure. You have an enormous set of egos competing between Dan Patrick and Governor Abbott. Governor Abbott has long been seen as a potential dark horse candidate for president. And although he's not showing up in Iowa for the first rounds of CNBC events, there are many who think he is lurking behind and will join into those debates, or will be chosen because of Texas's enormous Republican base as a vice presidential candidate. So it explains a lot of his posturing in the legislature on everything from abortion rights to issues having to do with potentially pardoning somebody who shot a Black Lives Matters protester, and whether or not that person who has been convicted of shooting him should be pardoned. Lieutenant Governor Paxton can't wait for Abbott to be gone so he could become governor, and is trying to be maneuvering himself to be to the left of Abbott so that he maintains that power space. So the rational person between the three, and both of them are rational. I don't mean to say that they're irrational. They just have political ambitions that overwhelm their judgment in terms of the way the state ought to be run. I certainly have known Greg Abbott for a very long time and think of him as a very competent and somebody I thought would be a very good governor in terms of having the state's principles upmost on his mind. But there's Speaker Phelan. And Phelan is the guy that's going to be the deal maker time after time. He's from Beaumont. He has spent most of his life in the legislature. He understands the process very well and is not afraid to be the deal broker between the two of them. And so most of the real decisions are going to be made by Phelan and Phelan's office. And I think because he represents Beaumont, and his personal wealth to some extent is based around oil and gas interests, he's going to be very friendly to those folk. And he is somebody who reads political tea leaves very well. And so I think he'll have a sense both of where his members are, but also will better represent the interests of Texans than I think the other two leaders will.
Thank you.
Appreciate the analysis. I do want to touch on the emergency items and the interest that you had brought up in the original question. Yeah. They are focusing pretty heavily on responding to the fentanyl crisis that's affecting our state and really having an impact on Dallas County specifically, especially in our schools. Dallas County has been working very hard to help get fentanyl test strips decriminalized. That bill has left the House. It was passed almost unanimously. I think it was 142-3 or something like that. And it's on its way to the Senate. The Senate has a very powerful chairman carrying it on their side. And so it looks like it's in pretty good shape. You know, other than that priority, the really big one that has taken up a lot of the air down in, or the breathing room down in Austin, has been education savings accounts and school choice. And last week, the House floor made their opinion of that proposal very clear. It sure seemed like they tried to put a budget amendment. Let me rephrase them. Representative Herrero put a budget amendment up that would essentially ban public dollars from being used for education savings accounts or being pushed into private schools. And that bill was added to, or that amendment was added to the appropriations bill on the House floor by a pretty wide margin. You had 85 votes in favor of that, and then you had 12 who P&V'd the vote or present not voting. And even if all of them would have supported education savings account, you still had really an 11 vote deficit for school choice on the House side. And so that really tells you that the governor's got a lot of work to do on that front. I don't know if Smitty has anything he wants to add on that one. It doesn't directly relate to the county, but it does relate to our constituents. It became a very, very big deal, especially the last 2 weeks of session.
And I will add that this is probably one of the two issues that will probably propel us into a special session.
Yes.
And the question in the special session is what else is added. My sense is that we may have difficulty coming to a budget, or this issue may get segmented out from the budget so that the state can continue to operate, and then the school choice issue be added back to the special session agenda with the goal to run out the patience of the holdouts like we did in the last several sessions on redistricting or some of the election issues. So I think we'll probably have this issue and perhaps one other, and I'm assuming at this point that's going to be the question of property tax relief. They're going to push us into special sessions. And to some extent, for those of you who work for the county, the question of property tax relief is going to be a bread and butter issue for you, your capacity to continue to fund all the services you've provided in the past. And a place where I think you, in a special session, can be particularly effective in your roles as citizens. We'll get to that in a bit here about how you all can be impactful, but I think it's important to kind of know where we're likely to head and what's going to be at stake.
You make very good points, because absolutely everyone is impacted by some of the decisions that the legislature makes, for one thing. And you also noted that having to approve a balanced budget for Dallas County, I feel particularly keenly when I see that the property tax dollars, because that is our major source of income for county government, if that's going to be curtailed, then you're absolutely right. You have to make even harder decisions on what are we going to fund, or where are we going to look for additional funding. So all of us are looking with great interest. But I also, the fact that we kind of get a second shot in a special session, is that the good news or the bad news? I'm not sure. I guess we'll find out how that goes on. So, kind of from where you sit, and I know that both of you have been active in talking with, a great number of legislators, other people interested in what's going on there, people who come to testify, etc. Now that the hearings have started, how do you spend your time and what happens now? Why don't you go first?
Oh boy. So, once a committee hearing is posted, if there are bills on there that we like or that that we have a problem with, we try to get most of the work done on the front end on fixing language. Our departments, we've sent them over 2,500 bills at this point to analyze and get us feedback on, and we engage very quickly with the authors of the bills if they're simple fixes. Many times, bills filed and one to two word change can change the impact on Dallas County dramatically. The anecdote that I like to use is that in my first session working with Dallas County, there was a bill that had the word "shall" in it, and that "shall" That one word cost us $7 million to comply with the bill, or would have cost us $7 million to comply with the bill. Changing that word to a may made it absolutely optional for us to provide the service being proposed by the legislator. And then it lets our local elected leaders at Dallas County make the determination, is this a good fit for our community? And so many times that's what we're dealing with. And if the legislator doesn't want to make that change, then when the committee hearing happens, we show up, we express our concerns. Likely we have talked to all or close to all of the members of that committee beforehand. And then we just see where the chips fall at that point. And if the bill gets out of committee, then it was alluded to earlier, you start working calendars or Senate administration, and as it starts working its way through the process, and if it gets out of one chamber, you rinse and repeat it again on the other side to either support it or oppose it, because a bill, if somebody files a House bill, it's got to pass the House, then it has to pass the Senate through the same process, and so you get two bites at the apple, so to speak, before it goes to the governor.
And let me join in here a little bit and say, when you look at a legislative problem, a bill that's going through that would restrict the rights of counties to protect their citizens through preemption or whatever, that sounds like a daunting bill. It is a daunting bill, but you have 180 members of the legislature and the governor and lieutenant governor. So how is it you focus your attention? Well, there are these shoots called committees that typically have on the low end 7, on the high end 11. Typically, some of them have 13, unless it's the budget or something like that. That are the killing fields or the amending fields, as it were. You got to get a majority of the members who are present at the time the bill is brought up to vote for it. So you sit down, you look at the bills that are coming through, you look at who's from Dallas County or an adjacent county, and then you say, this could affect me deeply or affect my county deeply. And as an employee, you're not prohibited from sharing your experience on how this might affect you. Yeah, they may try and muzzle you later, but at this point, they haven't done so yet. Just don't say you're representing Dallas County in this conversation. Say, I'm approaching you as an individual who knows a great deal about this program or that program through my employment. And you don't have to say, I'm with Dallas County. The implication can be hanging. And if I'm wrong, somebody with the county will quickly correct me, but you haven't lost your right to participate as a citizen yet in the state of Texas. But more importantly, it's also getting your friends, neighbors, and relatives to call in as well and focus on those people first who are in Dallas County and those who might be people that you see that might have some other reason to be educated by you. They might be a social worker, they might have been a cop, etc., where you might be able to express before they became a legislator your experience. And we have seen over the years that conversations with the staff of legislators or a handwritten note or a note that is not part of an email chain that gets forwarded or something downloaded or sent from an internet site, gets tremendous respect in the legislative process. In my work, I was at one time a legislative aide. The vast majority of the bills that went through the House, we heard nothing from anybody except lobbyists. There would be typically 100 bills a session where we would get communications of significance. That means like 10 letters is what it used to mean in my office, would then be flagged to the boss and say, This is a big deal to people who really know what's going on with this bill. It's poorly written. If it were fixed and written this way, it could make a big difference in terms of the negative impact, or eliminate the negative impact, or create a positive impact. 100 bills, it would kill my boss's vote without a thought. 100 letters. So it doesn't take many people to make a difference in the way a legislator votes. Start with your own, start with people who may share common interest with you, and that makes a big difference. And it's the committee process where that's going to really be effective. And if you think you have something in particular that you uniquely could say to the committee, write that committee member and say, I could be a good witness. Would you, if you would like, I can come down. Again, your county probably has restrictions on how you identify yourself. You should check with Teresa or Charles or somebody like that before you come down. But you have not been muzzled yet in this legislative process, and you have the right to do that. Then
You keep promising that. So what you're saying is that as time goes on and a particular bill is working through the process, that there may be a time when people coming to speak to the whichever group it is not welcomed? Is that what you're saying?
No. What I'm saying is, you are welcome to do that. You are citizens. That your right as
Okay.
county employees to speak has not been muzzled. The question is, do you do it on behalf of the county, or do you?
Okay. But we could be muzzled, is what you're saying.
And the bill to do that has already left the Senate and is in the House right now, waiting for a hearing in House State Affairs.
Right.
And so, if you're going to do it, now's the session to do it, just in case.
And that bill number again? That bill number again?
Oh, Senate Bill 175 by Mays Middleton is sitting in House State Affairs waiting for a hearing right now.
Yeah. So just good shot, good opportunity to speak against it. Now, you can ask the member to vote against it. Clearly, that's the preference. Or you can ask them to be mysteriously needing to go to the bathroom when that bill comes up, and repeatedly have an upset stomach. You often have stomach flu running around the legislature on certain bills. There's been jokes about, well, maybe we should move the committee meeting into the bathroom because the majority of the members are in the bathroom, but they can't do that. But members do, and they can do walk votes, so they don't have to vote on stuff.
Yeah, you chuckle, but I do know that you've been through that. So I have a sneaky suspicion of that which you speak.
Oh yeah.
Any other observations on this particular piece of now what happens?
I think, just to give everybody kind of a flavor of how legislative session ebbs and flows. The first 60 days is bill filing and ceremonial actions on the House and Senate floor. And then once you get to the 61st day, which happened about 2-3 weeks ago at this point, that's when the work is done. And so we are right now in the peak activity of session. And the saying goes that you get to April and you're about 60% of the way done time-wise, but you've only done about 5% of the work. And so we still have about 95% of the work left to do between now and the end of session, which is May 29th. And so this just when all the activity is, quite frankly, all the activity that matters when it comes to passing laws.
You've talked a lot about process and that kind of stuff. To get into and put a little bit finer point on that, if a person is following a specific bill, I mean, I know that you can figure out what committee is it in, who's sponsoring it, and who's the membership of the committee, and those kinds of things. But are there, if you were looking at the process in general, are there committees that have more power or weight or of greater interest than others?
Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. So on the House side, you have, in my opinion, three committees that really matter. House Calendars Committee is the most important committee on the House side. It decides what the full body of the House is going to consider on the floor. So when all 150 members are meeting, the House Calendars Committee decides what they're meeting on. Just below that is House State Affairs. So I would rank them as the second most important committee. That is regularly referred to as the Speaker's Committee. So if the Speaker wants something to pass or something to die, usually gets referred there, even if sometimes it would be referred to something else. And then the third most important, and it is incredibly biased opinion because I work for Dallas County, but is Ways and Means. Ways and Means Committee decides how we Texans will be taxed on a variety of fronts, not just property tax. They decide sales tax policy. They decide franchise tax policy. They decide who gets exemptions from any one of the taxes. And then on the Senate side, it's pretty much the same. You've got the Senate State Affairs Committee, which is similar to the House State Affairs Committee. You've got Senate Administration, which functions similarly to House calendars. And then you've got Senate Finance, which does not only tax policy, but it also does the budget. So really, those are the three main committees, at least from our perspective, that govern a lot of the activity down in Austin. Just as another anecdote, there were 8,000 bills filed, and on the House side, over 10% of those got referred to Ways and Means. So, and there are 30 plus committees on the House side that these bills were supposed to be distributed amongst. And so it just gives you an idea of the importance of these committees.
So how
And
many
State Affairs
bills?
also has the ability, is the multi-jurisdictional committee. You know, if it's a purely county bill, it might go to county affairs. If it has to do with education, it might go to the Committee on Education. But when there are different entities involved, municipalities and counties, it goes by rule, which of course can be waived, but would go by rule to state affairs because it affects multiple jurisdictions. So that's also another rule of thumb that is useful for thinking about, well, where is this bill going to go? And House State Affairs has a couple of members that are particularly effective on this. Rafael Anchia, who's a senior Democrat, arguably the smartest person in the legislature, is a really good asset for Dallas County there. And then Charlie Guerin from Fort Worth is one of the more senior members. He's now Speaker Pro Tem, as I recall. Charlie would kill me if I ever said this, but he's generally considered a moderate Republican, although he represents Fort Worth. He's the guy that I typically go to and say, Charlie, this is really bad policy. It makes no sense. And he'll say, I ain't going to haul it for you, but you might want to go talk to so-and-so, and he'll be able to help you with this particular bill. And for many years, he's been sort of one of the catchers of really, really bad policy. Now, he's carried some really bad stuff. He's not immune to carrying bad stuff. He's a good guy.
Good points, very good points. Now a question for both of you. Both of you have your time, talk a minute about your time lobbying the legislature, and over the period of time, has the environment changed? Are there outside forces that impact what goes on at the legislature that either are national or I don't know what they might be? Do you behave differently now than when you started a few years ago?
Yeah, absolutely. It's as I mentioned in my opening remarks, this is probably the worst legislature I've ever worked with. It has come from a combination of things that begin with the heart and soul of who gets elected to the legislature, and that's through redistricting. And with redistricting, which happened a couple years ago in the 21 session, we're now at a point where most members never fear a re-election challenge. My memory is that there were really 20 of the 180 people who had a serious challenger. So in a general election, in a primary election, that number was higher. But basically, the primary election determines which Republican or which Democrat is going to come to the legislature. So primary elections matter, but not very many people vote. And particularly if that election goes to a runoff, the people who typically vote are the hardcore Republicans or Democrats. And so you have this polarization that occurs because people on either side of the aisle will mobilize a relatively small percentage of the voting population to show up on those runoffs. So 3 to 5% of the voting population who show up at a runoff election typically determine who's there. That's why the extremes get more represented and the polarization increases. Secondly, and by the way, I don't have a solution to that problem. I just, it's getting worse and I can't figure out how to make it better. The second is the national political stage, and the hardening of has really made a big difference. Goes right back to the first point. Then there are some special interests. In particular, I'm going to call out the oil and gas industry that have grown in influence in the last decade or so, and are the big funders between, and some, not all, certainly, are the big funders of the groups that use modern media technologies to convince voters or convince members that a vote on a certain measure would get them blacklisted on their websites, and that affects those 3%. Whether it's Republican, typically with the oil and gas, or other interests, the teachers and so forth with the Democrats, those kinds of influences have extraordinary sway. Just as a general thing, and as a general statement, and this will be true and not true in various instances, about 25% of the money in the political process comes from the oil and gas industry. And as Ann Richards famously said, you got to dance with them that brung you. And so taking a hard vote against the oil and gas industry, or those people who represent the oil and gas industry, and could be fatal to your candidacy, because then the organized money goes to a different candidate. And it's not just oil and gas interests. Some of the same players are the people who fund the school voucher program, or the anti-public health program, the anti-abortion stuff, because of religious beliefs, or because they believe that this is a way for the free market, free enterprise system to operate without being fettered by too much local control, which is where a lot of the efforts to keep local governments from passing more restrictive ordinances on air quality or environmental issues, on policies having to do with credit operators, or having to do with healthcare, are coming from, because of this belief that it will help create a bigger, stronger Republican-dominated state. So it's an enormous change that has occurred with the new media coming in, and practitioners of that are really being funneled by the oil and gas industries.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the words local control. When I started doing this, I would hear these grand stories from my predecessor about how much the legislature loved their local cities and counties, and they loved to work with us. And then, not saying he duped me into doing this, but it sure doesn't feel like they love us now. you know, uh, it has been just such a stark shift in policy from the state. And the kind of the thing that has really baffled me is, I went to college in the early 2000s and studied politics and studied the idea of local control. And it was always the Republican Party that subscribed to local control. And now when you watch the debate in Austin, it has kind of flipped. I'm not saying the Democrats didn't believe in local control in the early 2000s, but it is really the Democrats asking the question, well, what about local control? And then you have folks on, especially on the Senate side, using language like top-down guidelines to make sure that locals aren't getting out of control. And and so that's kind of the rhetoric that we're fighting, that we're running up against down in Austin. And nothing can describe it any more than the former Speaker of the House being caught on tape talking about how he wants to make it his mission to make it as uncomfortable as possible for cities and counties to be in the Capitol building, advocating for the interests of our constituents. Uh, that tape coming to light actually forced that speaker into retirement, though he is still active as a lobbyist down in the Capitol. And the other person caught on the tape somehow is still chair of the Calendars Committee, which is the most powerful committee in the House, even after being caught deliberately or being caught on tape saying that he wanted to target fellow Republicans in his own chamber to primary them. And so it's just an interesting dynamic that we have had the pleasure of experiencing every time we go down to Austin. And it is to say that the legislature as a whole is hostile to local government, I think is an understatement at this point.
So this kind of, I'm going to insert a little question here. So are there offices that if you step into their lobby, that you get the very distinct feeling that you are not welcome because of either your position, Smitty on, consumer protections and Charles of your association with local governments? I mean, you're both looking at the bottom of the pyramid as opposed to the top of the pyramid.
Yeah, I mean, there are. I've been around long enough to where generally I get a chance at least to talk to staff people, but I get the impression that when I walk out the door or when I walk in the door, they don't take notes. Sometimes the materials that I hand them go in the round file before they're even looked at, and I can hear those pieces of paper hitting the edge of the trash can before the door closes. And they're not even going to bring up the fact that I was by. And it's harder and harder to get marginal Republicans or the people who I think would used to be able to get to vote with me, and they tell me I'm afraid of being primaried, Smitty. And that's what it's really boiling down to. And the message here continues to be that in counties or in suburban areas where you have a significant amount of sort of swing Republicans, in particular swing Republicans, women who are concerned about certain issues, about whether their daughters might be able to get an abortion, or afraid that they're not going to be able to afford a private school, or who have concerns about what happens if they lose their job and won't be able to qualify for health care. These are the counties that matter. And these are the people who and can reach out to and say, we're about ready to lose the ability to regulate or to be able to provide programs through the counties or the cities that are helpful to people. And we're going to need your help because to be able to reach your Republican legislators. And again, the only antidote after 40 years of doing this that I have found to organized money is organized people. And those legislators are afraid of being primaried by somebody on the margins. But worse yet, they're afraid of alienating a large group of their constituents because they're not listening on particular issues like school choice or others that are sort of heart and center to the people in those districts that have flipped repeatedly in your suburbs in Dallas County from one party to the other. And so it's going to take some thought by all y'all who are county employees on who you know who is that marginal voter to be able to express to their marginal members, this is critical to us, and to give them an example that they can share with their legislators of why and how counties made a difference and why we need to protect the rights of counties to be able to act when the state won't. The COVID is a great example. You know, a lot of Republicans were terrified of COVID, really liked the mask mandate, very concerned about their kids getting COVID. And now that'll be taken away from us in this legislative session. The ability of folks like the county commission to take the kind of high quality, decisive action that you did to protect your employees and others in your city or in your county. That was an example of when the county stood up and did something really important. Environmental stuff that you guys have done, all that stuff is going to be threatened, and the services you provide under these these pieces of legislation that are pending. And you are the people who know what that is, and you are in the position to educate those who are in those counties, those parts of the counties that are going to swing one way or the other.
Yeah, I don't think that there's any one office that we could identify as us not being welcomed in. The one good thing about the taxpayer-funded lobbying debate that has gone on for now 3 sessions is that we have very effectively been able to separate ourselves, people like me, employees of government, who have been charged with going down there to educate the impact of bills to legislators, from Chapter 305 lobbyists. And so, that coupled with the variety of things that Dallas County works on, public health, elections, transportation, you name it, it has made it more welcoming for those of us to go into offices because, we probably, and I don't know the statistics off the top of my head, but we probably like as many bills as we don't like, and they cross parties. Democrats file good and bad bills as it relates to impact on county constituents. Republicans file good and bad bills. And so as long as you understand that, and it's something that took me a session to figure out, as long as you understand that when you walk in, everything is transactional, right? They can be your opponent on one issue, but they can be your ally on the other. And so, they understand the same thing that we do, especially seasoned members. Charlie Guerin got brought up. Speaker Pro Tem Guerin absolutely understands the process. He gets that sometimes you're with him, sometimes you're against him, and is one of those that won't hold it against you regardless of the direction you go, because he just understands the legislative process. And so, that is, a lot of times you see folks who engage with the legislature for the first time, especially if it's because they don't like a bill, they get extreme pushback from the office, and it becomes a very unpleasant experience. And it becomes a learning experience that, even though you don't like that bill and they have a difference of opinion, you can take a step back with the understanding that everything is transactional. Yes, they don't like that, but there's probably a litany of other issues that they're with you on. It makes it a lot easier to work in the offices once you get that understanding.
Okay, thank you very much for those insights.
We have about 5 minutes left. Do we want to see if there's any questions?
Absolutely. Are there any questions from any of the people online?
Do you have one from Pat King?
Well, Patty, are you online? Do you want to ask a question?
It's in the chat. Oh, if you don't mind, I'll read it. Do you find that constituent input is mattering less and less with legislators voting along more morality lines?
I don't think constituent input has ever lost its effect. We talked about it, actually Smitty talked about it earlier. Yeah, constituents reaching out is a big deal, right? And especially if they reach out in large numbers. And so what was said earlier is you get 10 letters, that's a big deal. You get 100 letters, that'll cause you to start thinking about the position you're about to take. And so politics, frankly, is just a numbers game. And the bigger the number gets, the more attention that you will get from the legislator, just as a general rule of thumb.
And again, I think the two components of this are the longer term game. And this is a great time, for example, with these bills pending in state affairs and so forth, of writing a letter based on experience that's thoughtful and reaching out to legislative staffers and saying, I have some experience in this. I don't represent Dallas County, but I work there. And this is an important thing because of what I know about how this bill would affect us and why we have special programs the state doesn't, et cetera. This is a real good example of, you all know where state law fails, and being able to say we have adopted this policy to fill in these gaps is an important message as to why some of these bills should not pass. But then there's the secondary part, and I'm sure you've certainly experienced this, that what you hear when you're watching a debate on the floor is people's phones going off all the time with an incoming tweet or a message to their individual offices or from their staffers saying, please vote against or please vote for this. You've got this really instantaneous input to the members of the legislature through the tools you have access to that is growing in power. And I've watched members switch their votes on the board because of tweets that have come in extraordinary numbers during the debate on a piece of legislation. And you can sit there and watch the board, and then all of a sudden his phone numbers are going, and he'll turn from red to green or vice versa because he's afraid of the constituents.
Yeah.
That's an interesting and also obviously multifaceted response to I think it was a very good question by Patty. It looks like we are about at the end of our time. I do want to say thank you so much to those people who have chosen to spend a moment and listen to two experienced legislative folks, Tom Smith, Smitty, who's done a lot of work on behalf of consumers and in a lot of different areas, and of Charles Reed, who is the Dallas County liaison and also a Dallas County staff person. So I just want to say we do nothing by ourselves, rule number one. So my staff are here also who helped put this thing together. So thank you, Aaron and LaToya. And so with that, thanks. And we'll see you at the legislature. Get those cards and letters in because they are important. This is Teresa Daniel. Yes, sir. One last word.
Don't forget tweeting.
Don't forget tweeting. This is Teresa Daniel, your Dallas County Commissioner from District 1, saying thank you so much. And now let's go make some changes.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.